There's a moment that happens after you've committed to change. The first few days feel good. You're motivated, you're clear, you're doing the thing. You can feel yourself being different. And for a moment, you believe this is it. This time it's going to stick. But then life happens. Something unexpected comes up. You get busy, you get tired, you miss one day, then another. And before you know it, the change you were so committed to has quietly dissolved back into the pattern you were trying to leave behind. And you're left with that familiar disappointment, that sense of why does this keep happening? Why can't I just maintain what I start? And the story you tell yourself is usually some version of, I don't have enough discipline. I don't want it badly enough. I'm not consistent enough. But here's what I want you to consider. The problem isn't your discipline. The problem isn't your commitment. The problem is that you're trying to sustain change without structure. This video is about why change needs structure to last. It's about what happens when you try to rely on motivation and willpower alone. About why habits collapse when they're not supported by something deeper. And about why the freedom you think structure will take away is actually the thing structure protects. This won't tell you what structure looks like for you. It won't give you a system to follow, but it will help you see why without structure, change doesn't just slow down, it decays. And why this is the point where transformation either stabilizes or fades. Let's start with something most people don't realize. Habits collapse without identity support. You can build a habit. You can do the thing every day for weeks, maybe even months. But if that habit isn't connected to who you believe you are, if it's just a behavior you're performing, not an expression of your identity, it won't last. Because habits that aren't identity aligned require constant effort, constant decision making, constant override of your default patterns, and eventually, that effort becomes unsustainable. You can force yourself to exercise every morning, but if you don't see yourself as someone who moves their body, if you don't identify as someone who prioritizes their health, then every morning becomes a negotiation, a battle, a choice you have to remake over and over. And the moment your willpower depletes, the moment life gets hard, the moment the initial motivation fades, the habit collapses. Not because you're weak, but because it was never integrated into who you are. This is why people can maintain a new behavior for a while and then suddenly revert. Because the behavior was floating. It wasn't anchored to anything deeper. It wasn't supported by an identity that said, this is who I am. This is how I operate. And without that support, without the internal alignment between behavior and identity, the habit becomes fragile. It becomes dependent on external conditions, on having enough energy, on feeling motivated, on nothing disrupting the routine. And life always disrupts the routine. So if you want change to last, it can't just be something you do. It has to be connected to who you're becoming. And that connection, that's part of structure. Now, let's talk about why change decays without reinforcement. Change isn't a one-time event. It's not a decision you make and then it's done. Change is a process, and processes require maintenance. They require reinforcement. They require systems that keep the new pattern alive when the initial momentum fades. Because here's what most people don't understand. Your brain is designed to revert to what's familiar, to what's been reinforced the most. And the old pattern? It's been reinforced for years, maybe decades. Your brain has run that pathway so many times that it's automatic. It's effortless. It's the default. The new pattern, on the other hand, it's fragile. It's new. It hasn't been reinforced enough to become automatic. So it requires conscious effort. It requires attention. It requires you to actively choose it over the default. And you can do that for a while, but if there's no system reinforcing that choice, if there's no structure reminding you, supporting you, making the new pattern easier than the old one, the effort becomes exhausting. And eventually your brain does what it's designed to do. It defaults back. Not because you failed, but because change without reinforcement decays. It fades back into the old pattern, slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you're right back where you started. This is where most people get stuck. They make the change, they maintain it for a while, but they don't build the reinforcement systems. They don't create the structure that keeps the new pattern alive when willpower runs out. So the change decays, and they blame themselves. They think they're not disciplined enough, not committed enough, not strong enough. But that's not it. They just didn't have the structure that would have held the change in place long enough for it to become automatic. Here's the third thing. Structure is built through repetition, environment, and accountability. Repetition is the most obvious one. You have to do the new thing enough times that your brain starts to recognize it as familiar, that it stops flagging it as effortful, that it files it under known instead of unknown. And that takes time, more time than most people expect, because your brain doesn't just need to learn a new pattern, it needs to unlearn the old one, and unlearning is slower than learning. But repetition alone isn't enough, because repetition is fragile when it relies solely on willpower. So you need environment. You need to design your surroundings so the new behavior is easier than the old one. So you're not constantly fighting friction. So the default option is the one you're trying to build, not the one you're trying to leave behind. If you're trying to eat healthier, that means not having the old foods in your house. If you're trying to build a creative practice, that means setting up your space so the tools are accessible. If you're trying to set boundaries, that means reducing exposure to situations that trigger the old pattern. Environment isn't just about physical space, it's about the people around you, the content you're consuming, the rhythms and routines that shape your day. All of it either reinforces the new pattern or pulls you back into the old one. And then there's accountability, not external pressure, not someone policing your behavior, but a system that witnesses your process, that reflects back what you're building, that reminds you why this matters when motivation fades. Accountability can be a person, it can be a community, it can be a structure you've built that tracks your progress, that shows you the evidence of your consistency, that makes the pattern visible instead of invisible. Because when change is invisible, when it's just something you're doing quietly on your own, it's easy to let it slip. Easy to skip a day. Easy to tell yourself it doesn't matter. But when it's witnessed, when it's tracked, when it's reinforced, it becomes real. It becomes something you're accountable to, not because someone's judging you, but because you've created a system that holds the change in place. Here's the fourth thing, and this is critical. Solo change is strategically fragile. Most people try to change alone. They don't tell anyone. They don't ask for support. They just decide they're going to be different, and then they try to do it quietly, privately, and on their own. And sometimes that works, but strategically, it's fragile. Because when you're alone with your change, you're alone with your resistance, with your doubts, with the voice that says this doesn't matter, no one will notice if you stop. And when that voice gets loud, when the old pattern pulls harder than the new one, there's nothing external holding the line. There's no one reflecting back the progress you've made. No one reminding you why you started. No one witnessing the cost of reverting. So you slip. And because no one knows, it feels like it doesn't count. Like you can just restart tomorrow. And maybe you do. But the cycle repeats. And each time, the change becomes a little more fragile. This isn't about needing someone to hold you accountable in a punitive way. It's about recognizing that change happens in relationship. To yourself, yes, but also to others, to context, to systems that support you. And when you try to do it entirely alone, when you reject structure because you think it means you're not capable on your own, you're making it harder than it needs to be. Not because you're weak, but because humans aren't designed to transform in isolation. And this is what structure provides. It's the container that holds your change when you can't hold it yourself. It's the system that reinforces the new pattern when your willpower runs out. It's the framework that makes sustainability possible, not just in ideal conditions, but in real life. So let's bring this together. If you've been starting changes and watching them dissolve, if you've been wondering why you can't just maintain what you start, it's not because you're undisciplined. It's not because you don't want it enough. It's because you've been trying to sustain change without structure. And change without structure, it's fragile. It decays. It collapses the moments conditions shift. And you might be feeling something right now. Maybe resistance. Maybe the fear that structure means rigidity, that it means giving up freedom, that it means you're not capable of doing it on your own. That's okay. That's a common fear. But here's the truth. Structure doesn't limit you. It protects you. It protects the change you're trying to make from the decay that inevitably happens without reinforcement. Freedom without structure collapses. Not because freedom is bad, but because freedom, when it's not held by anything, just becomes chaos. It becomes doing whatever feels easiest in the moment. And what feels easiest is almost always the old pattern. Real freedom, the kind where you're actually living differently, where the change has lasted, where you've become the person you were trying to be, that freedom is built on structure, on systems that make the new behavior easier than the old one, on environments that support the change instead of undermining it, on accountability that witnesses your process and holds it real, on repetition that reinforces the new pattern until it becomes automatic. And this is where transformation either stabilizes or fades. This is the turning point, not the moment of insight, not the moment of decision, but the moment where you either build the structure that holds the change or you don't. And if you don't, the change will decay, not immediately, but gradually, until you're back where you started, wondering what went wrong. You don't need more motivation. You don't need more willpower. You don't need to want it more. You don't need to try harder. You need structure. You need the systems that make the new behavior sustainable, that reinforces it when motivation fades, that protects it from the decay that happens when life gets hard. Because change doesn't last on its own. It lasts when it's held by something stronger than willpower, when it's supported by structure. And that structure, it's not a cage. It's not rigidity. It's not giving up your autonomy. It's the framework that makes lasting change possible. It's the container that holds the transformation long enough for it to become real. So if you've been cycling through change after change, wondering why nothing sticks, this is why. Not because you're broken, but because transformation needs more than intention. It needs structure.